welcome to a special edition of EWTN's Bookmark, and I'm Doug Keck, your host. You know, EWTN's James Day visited the Napa Institute's 2024 Summer Conference, where he sat down with several Catholic authors to discuss their books. Here's a conversation James had with author Catherine Pakaluk.
And I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Catherine Pakaluk, Associate Professor of Economics at Catholic University of America, and the author of Hannah's Children, The Women Quietly Defying the Birth Dearth, 2024 Regnery. Catherine, thank you for being with me.
You're welcome.
Catherine, what is your confirmation saint and why? Or who, I should say, who is your confirmation saint and why?
Great question. My confirmation saint is Maria Goretti. Yeah. And why? Well, my mother suggested her to me. I hadn't really known much about her or heard much about her. And, you know, I must have been 15 or 16 years old. And, you know, I was really impressed by, you know, being about that age. You know, I read about her and I thought, we live in a world that doesn't value innocence, children, family. I loved that she was from a large family. I thought that was really neat. And I loved that she was young. She was a young saint. And I thought, okay, this is a model of young holiness. So yeah, you know, as a kid, it wasn't a deep decision. I was just drawn to her beauty.
And the ironic thing about her is she was childless. Is that correct?
Maria Goretti?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. She died. Well, she was killed by her attacker as still a teenage girl. Yeah. So she was never married.
And how did G.K. Chesterton and Blaise Pascal, one of my favorites,
yeah.
and I truly mean that,
yeah.
How did they inform your work, this particular work?
Yeah. Well, we'll take them separately.
Okay.
Pascal is easier to talk about quickly. You know, when I first encountered some of his work, I was really struck by this idea of reasons of the heart. So Pascal talks about how the heart has reasons. And those reasons sometimes defy reason. They defy ordinary reasoning. I can't tell you the French, right? So he's writing in French. But as a college student, I encountered that, and I thought, what does that mean, reasons of the heart, right? Do reasons of the heart, are they things that are irrational? Or are they super rational in a way? Do they perfect reason? Or how do they guide reason? And of course, as a Catholic, and a more mature Catholic now than when I first encountered Blaise Pascal, I would like to think more about reasons of the heart as matters of faith, and matters of a kind of assent of faith that doesn't cancel out ordinary reasoning. So anyway, I was just struck by this phrase, the reasons of the heart, from when I was in college. And so then as I was trying to put this work together, trying to think, what are we really getting at? What is the story of people who choose to have children, seemingly against human wisdom, right? So we have this whole human wisdom about how many children people should have. So what is the story? Is this irrational behavior? Is it contra reason, right? Is it truly correct to say that reason says you should have 1.6 children? You know, and so of course I believed that the story was one of a very deep and important type of rationality. So not an irrationality, but a rationality guided by, I would say, the light of faith. So reason perfected by the light of faith. And so it seemed to me that phrase from Pascal's work was a suitable one, and one that everybody knows. And so I cite that at the beginning. Now you asked about G.K. Chesterton, and so that's a little bit more there. When I was a young woman and through college, I had a lot of atheist professors in college, like many people do, and went through a couple of years where I was really, you know, struggling with my faith and wondering, yeah.
And this is the University of Pennsylvania?
This is the University of Pennsylvania. I had been raised a cradle Catholic. My parents gave me a wonderful education. I would say that they sacrificed my whole childhood to make sure that we had a Catholic education all the way through. Nevertheless, I went to this this secular, very, very hostile secular college. Any observer would have thought I was well prepared to enter that kind of a college situation. But I had many, many smart and talented professors who, you know, just didn't believe the faith. And so after a few years, I was influenced by friends, graduate students, professors. So I began to struggle with, you know, let's say the big questions, you know, really, I mean, I figured, if God exists, I'm a Catholic. I wasn't tempted by any other way. But, the appeal, the seduction of intelligence is a kind of alternate, an alternate religion, really, of its sorts. It's appealing. It's seductive. It's seductive to smart people, I think, and certainly I was susceptible to that. So I had these very bright professors who were, deeply hostile to the faith and very atheist, and so I really struggled for a couple of years there. And I never formally renounced the church or my faith, but wasn't sure. So there's a long story of first coming to read one thing and then the other. Reading John Henry Newman was very important for me one summer, and I was really privileged to take a course on Newman with a great Newman scholar by the name of Reverend Ian Carr. He passed away about 2 years ago. He was a convert from Anglicanism to Catholic faith. He's just a splendid priest and scholar. And I signed up to take his course because I really thought, well, before I really renounce the faith and walk away, I better study with some really good, not atheists. So I signed up to take his course. I read John Henry Newman. And around that same time, I came across Chesterton, in particular his book called The Everlasting Man. And in this book, Chesterton, he makes a claim that people haven't really rejected Christianity. What they've rejected is a kind of, recycled remnant of Christianity, that they don't really see that the Christianity they are encountering in the world is really not the real thing. It's not the real thing. And so he then he undertakes basically a thought experiment, and he says, if you really look at the world and you get very far away from what we're so familiar with, we're tired of looking at it. And he says, you come upon a strange land, and you would say, well, what do I find over here? I find all these strange things, but over here I find this little pocket of joy. I find a little pocket of we'll say, healthfulness and happiness. I find a little pocket of worship. He said, if you came across this in a foreign land, you would say, kind of, this is where it's at, right? This is truly true and truly good. So he thought we didn't see that or appreciate that about Christianity because we were kind of used to it. We'd gotten, in a sense, into a place where we take it for granted. He calls it this intermediate state. And so I was really taken with this. I thought, okay, he's exactly right. And he's exactly right. And as I was young and I was rediscovering my faith, I was reading John Henry Newman, and I thought, okay, so the exercise here is to look at the world and understand, begin to see it in a sense. People speak today about reenchantment. And there's a sense in which that was what he was getting at. Attempt to see the world as it really is, which is that Christianity and the light of faith changes everything. It changes everything. Right? Once you see it, you go, oh, it's wherever there's life, there's faith. So this was something I encountered a long, long time ago. And only after putting this book together did I realize that there's a bit of this there, which is, speaking about my book briefly, and we'll continue in a minute, but we live in a world today where there aren't enough children being born, and all around the world people aren't having enough children. And so the simple thought, like Chesterton was to say, if we looked around the whole world and said, where are there children? Where are children still being born? We would discover it's these little places where there's faith. And that was the exercise.
Well, let's talk more about the book then.
Yeah.
Because, there's, what would you define it genre-wise? Because there's scholarship,
yeah.
There's also narrative.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
A blend of two, or how
Yeah.
would you describe that?
Yeah. So I'm a social scientist. The kind of social science, this is qualitative social science, but I've often called it a narrative account. So I tried to narrate my findings as a story, and why? Because I wanted people to read it, right? So it's a humane type of social science. Sometimes they say it's aims to be social science that reads like fiction, or but there's more to that than just wanting it to be accessible, which I did. I wanted it to be very accessible to people. So of course I cite lots of research in there, hopefully in an accessible way. But part of that is a claim about what it means to study human beings. And so social scientists study human beings, it's what we do. But obviously a lot of social science has gotten into this trap of trying to summarize people with numbers and statistics. I'm not against that, it has its place. But to remove ourselves from the story of the person and what's the drama of the person inside, I think that's been a mistake. And it's made us avoid, or it's helped us to avoid looking at the hard question of how people choose. Right? Because the drama of human choice, that's at the heart of salvation, right? Right? God wants our yes. And so what helps us get to yes? So actually social science, what it has done is it's built a picture of people largely based on correlations, right? These correlations. Well, where you see more of this, you see more of this, and see more of this, you see more of this, and that's good as far as it goes. But if you really want to get into the sort of the drama of human life and start to think, well, how can this affect our choices for the better? You need to get into how people make decisions. So that requires long conversations, and fine, putting the results of those long conversations into dialogue with the correlations that we already see. So part of the job here was to demonstrate what I would call a humane approach to social science.
So you got on the road and you got out there and you talked to people. But before we get into that, really set the landscape for us. Nationally, globally, are we really facing a population collapse, or is that just a way to kind of grab as a hook to grab an audience?
Yeah, we are, we are. Now, I don't think we should run around trying to scare people, but we certainly the way population change occurs is that it's slow to see the compounded effects of things. So we are facing a population collapse. The United States has birth rate numbers that are very similar to the kinds of numbers that as a kid we heard about in Western Europe and Asia. Really just a little bit above 1.5 children per couple, per household. So that's pretty catastrophic. Why? Because the population will shrink. The number of workers will shrink. Politics will necessarily be unstable because why? Because people all sense that their way of life is under threat, and when people feel that their way of life is under threat, they become, we'll just say, more anxious. And that anxiety comes into the polls and it comes into our national conversation, right? We can all feel that anxiety. But finally, right, smaller and smaller family sizes means fewer brothers and sisters, fewer aunts and uncles, fewer cousins, for the same number of people, diminished human relationships, and that's a loss. Right? That's a loss.
Yeah, there's a great line you have where you talk about working professionals, young people doing their own thing, and then having a decision to say, well, I suppose we should start. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what that means.
Yeah. So the thing that I think people often overlook is that having children today is just it's completely an opt-in exercise, meaning it's not something you ever have to do. You can live your whole life, you can get married and couple up, and you never have to have a child. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is because of the efficiency of contraceptive technology. It's so good, we can say, it's so good at what it does that you can be married for 40 years and never conceive a child. And it's also because our society's become wealthy enough and we redistribute enough that no one needs to have children to be well supported in their old age. So the types of ways that you might think, well, sure, maybe I don't have to have a child, but of course I want to have a child. Those things have faded. So for young people, these young professionals doing their own thing, they have to decide at some point to stop doing their own thing and reorient their lives around the next generation. And so what I'm really highlighting in this book, at least the outcome of my research, is to see that that's a decision that trades on how valuable we think it is to have children, to put our lives at the service of the next generation. And increasingly, we're seeing in the polling data, I just saw some new polling data this morning, that when you ask young professionals and young people at all today, how likely is it, do you think, you'll have children? We're just seeing a really disturbing growth in young people saying, not very likely. And if you ask them why, they say things like, I just don't want to. So that is really the drama here. It's the question of why people don't want to. And they don't need to.
You profile certain women.
Yeah.
How did you decide on these individuals, and also talk about the travel that the extensive travel that you did and your team did in the research and the interviewing process?
Yeah, right. So, so we knew we wanted to interview, we'll say, people doing something different, people who had decided at some point to stop doing their own thing and had made a very intentional decision to have children. What I wanted to then find out was why. Why did you do this? And what do you think it means? So we knew we wanted to cover the whole country. So we picked about 10 regions around the country. And then we went into each region or each city, metropolitan area, and we identified with people on the ground in those places, church communities and neighborhoods that were known to be magnets for families. And most of us come from a place where we would say, yeah, that's a church where there's a lot of kids there. And basically what we did is follow best practices for these kinds of studies. It's not a random sample. People think of that in social science. It's too small for that. So what you do is you look in places where you might find people that fit your profile, and you hang flyers and you post them on even digital ad boards, like on Facebook. You might find a mom's group in Houston or something. You put an ad, seeking study participants. And we described what we were looking for. We're looking with people with really above average numbers of children. And we let people then fill out a form to apply to be interviewed. And then we took about 500 or 600 applications from all those 10 regions, about 50 or 60 from each region. Some are more, some are less. And then we took that set and we selected, we would have a little bit of information from each person who applied. And by that kind of information, I mean, what was their background, what was their religious faith or affiliation, ethnic or racial identity. You want a balanced sample. We didn't want to interview all Mormons or all Jews or all Catholics, So in that group, we'd selected out to be balanced, we'll say. And this is best practice for a small qualitative study.
You make a point that one might think there's that assumption that these large families that you're speaking of, that you're interviewing, must be Mormon, must be Catholic. And you make a point. No, that's not true.
Right.
And there's that, you almost say, well, there's a no-brainer out there that, of course, Catholic couples, married couples, are contraceptic. Let's just face it. Is there a disconnect that maybe we as a church aren't addressing much, and it's sort of, what do you think of that?
So this is really interesting. I mean, I grew up Catholic, and I grew up in a large Catholic family, and so as a kid, we used to get that, we're Catholic or Mormon, first of all, and then second, people in Catholic schools that I went to, I remember, saying derogatory things like, what's wrong with your family? What's wrong with your parents? They don't know how this happens, that kind of thing. We still get that today, right? Okay, so what's going on? I really wanted to find out what's the nature of this. As a Catholic, we have these funny words, and there's no official language for this. People who accept the Church's teaching on Humanae Vitae, for instance, right? So I accept the Church's teaching on Humanae Vitae. Is that why I have 8 children? And I thought to myself, I don't think that's right, actually. Meaning, I think you can accept the Church's teaching, rejecting the use of artificial birth control. And you could still think, I'm not sure how many children I can accept. I don't know if I even think it's that great to have children. There has to be this extra piece. There's another piece there, right? Which I think is the truth that Humanae Vitae actually gets at. The truth that Humanae Vitae gets at is that children are great blessings. It's God's vision for humanity. It's how He wants us to live. And that God's wisdom about having children is the reason for Humanae Vitae, right? Humanae Vitae isn't correct because the Church teaches it. The Church teaches it because it's correct. Right? That's of course how we should think about all of what the Church teaches. It helps us to avoid a kind of an ultramontanism or a certain kind of simplistic view of the Church, right? What the Church does for us is helps us to understand the things that are true because God says them. the God's vision for human life, which is reproductive, and that's that sounds like biological. It's there from the very beginning, right? He created us as two. He wants us to be fruitful and multiply, and that this is somehow participation in his communitarian life, right? So you asked about all Catholics today. So yeah, we know these depressing statistics. Most Catholics don't live according to Humanae Vitae. I would like to say that the sort of deeper question is why most Catholics don't view children as the greatest blessing. Right? So I think and so I actually want to say that I think the teaching in Humanae Vitae sometimes gets blown out of proportion in a sense, or it's being dragged out as sort of almost something to beat the church with, right? As if it's obvious that what human beings ought to do is limit their reproductive capacity. And so what is this backwards church that says we shouldn't do it this way, you can only do it this way? All right. But really where the action is, and this is what was really the value of interviewing Jewish women and Mormon women and Presbyterian women and Baptist women, is that they're not really interested in the debates about artificial contraception. They all accept artificial contraception. But what I found out was you can accept the use of artificial contraception, but because you're so convinced that children are blessings, and that this is what it means to live a good human life, and that God's wisdom exceeds our wisdom, right? These are the types of things I learned, that in a sense it wouldn't really matter. You have access to these artificial means, but that if you had to use them temporarily to wait till you were ready for your next child, you would view that as, well, we're not ready yet, but we will be ready soon. And so the difference between the Catholic women I talked to and the non-Catholic women I talked to was just what they used to space their children, right? And so without getting into the goodness or the badness of spacing in different ways, this highlighted something that to me was really quite fascinating. I said a minute ago, we have this thing, Catholics do, like, well, there's the Catholics who accept Humanae Vitae, but sometimes people use the word Orthodox Catholics. I don't like that word. It doesn't have any real meaning in the Catholic Church. But we say it because there's something we need to distinguish. We say, like, the Catholics who really believe the Church's teachings, right? Well, what I found out in my travels is that women of all faiths have the same kind of problem. So you talk to the Jewish women, they go, well, I used to be Jewish, but I wasn't that Jewish. And then I had an encounter with the historic tradition of my faith and my ancestors. I went to Israel, and I met rabbis who explained to me the teachings in a way I'd never heard. It came alive for me. I said, I really want to live this way. And they'll compare themselves to the way they were before, and they'll say, well, I wasn't really Jewish. I wasn't fully Jewish. I wasn't alive in my faith. And so I realized the thing that we grapple with how to say that, well, it's common among many different faiths. And so then what was left to me was to pick out, well, what was common among all the women of a Judeo or Christian faith, where they rejected this kind of overly planned way of childbearing. And what was common were these biblical truths. And I realized, you said, is the church missing something? That's what the church has been missing, is not that it wasn't ours. It, of course, is ours. It's in our heritage. But, in different times and places, you need to learn how, and the church has always been like this, what's the response to the day? The response to today has to be, I think, this articulation of the blessing of children, right? We can't lead with, we don't believe this is a good means to space your children. Because of course we do believe people couples should prayerfully figure out the right spacing of their children. We believe that. The more important thing is, how much are you after it? How much do you want this blessing? This is a blessing that God wants to bestow on you. And so beginning to press into, I think, that language of children as blessings. Don't wait. Don't get married and wait to have your first children, right? Just dive in, Nothing makes you ready for a child but having a child. So in a sense, this is we could use the word, it's a kind of pronatalist language, but not pronatalist as much as I would say biblical. This is why I like to appeal to the biblical Hannah. I think this is totally within our grasp. It's in our teaching. It's implicit. We just need to make it explicit. Yeah.
Mother Angelica's advice on young couples was, don't wait.
Don't wait.
Don't wait.
Yeah.
This reminds me of the Jewish blessing.
Yes.
Share that with us, please.
Yeah. Well, in the Jewish tradition, right, some of the women I interviewed will put it this way. They will say, I'm going to paraphrase, almost directly quote. Esther said, you know, in my understanding, there are three big blessings that God wants to send us, and these are wealth and health and children, and the biggest of these is children. And then she said things like, we should pray for that. We should pray to be blessed with children. And I thought, oh, this is like the biblical Hannah. So what happens to the biblical Hannah? She's, of course, not blessed with children. She's the favorite wife. Her husband has another wife who has lots of kids. Hannah's the favorite wife, but she isn't blessed with children. And so she goes and she desperately prays for children. And I thought, as a culture, do we pray for children? Actually, as a culture, no. We're sort of like, well. And so Esther also says, and I was really struck by this, she says, because these are the three big blessings, you can't have too much of any one of those things. You can't be too wealthy, in a sense. Prosperity is a gift from God, right? And we're conflicted about prosperity in lots of ways in this culture. But she says prosperity is a gift from God. Your health is a gift from God. Children are a gift from God. And she says, I don't think you could have too much of any of these things. And that really struck me. And I would say that most people agree you couldn't have too much wealth or too much health. But most people think you could have too many children. I thought that's the paradigm change, to move children into that bucket of things you can't have too much of course, within reason, but yeah.
Wrapping up here, have you been surprised? What has your reaction to the book? Any surprises?
Yeah, early on, I'm a college teacher, so I had the opportunity to present some of this material to college students, and I found over and over that they're deeply moved, not by what I'm saying, but deeply moved to hear the testimony of the women in the book, the stories. They read the stories, and oftentimes when I read the stories to them, there are a lot of tears. There's a lot of emotional, young people are moved. And it's really confirmed in me this sense that we aren't speaking about children this way. So they need to hear this, and it's really good to say it, and we can say it. So it sounds funny to say, but that was a surprise to me. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
We've been talking with Dr. Catherine Pakaluk, the author of Hannah's Children, The Women Quietly Defying the Birth Dearth. Catherine, thanks for being with me.
You're welcome. It's been great.
And that was James Day of EWTN speaking with author and social scientist Catherine Pakaluk about her book, Hannah's Children, The Women Quietly Defying the Birth Dearth, published by Gateway Editions, and of course available through our EWTN religious catalog, EWTNRC.com, all things Catholic. I'm Doug Keck. This has been a special edition of Bookmark. We'll see you next time.